Good morning, Morai Rabotai, Beruchim Abayim. We are continuing on Masechet Succah, and we are on the Chaf Zayin, Amud Bet, 11 lines down from the top of the Amud. Tanya Rabbi Eliezer Omer. Today's Amud is being learned as a Zchut Refuah Shelema for Esther Bracha Bat Chaya, Nisim Ben Miriam, Rebecca, Joanna Bat Rebecca, and specially dedicated for Refuah Shelema of Rachel Simcha Bat Nahid, that should have full recovery, Refuah Shelema Be'ezrat Hashem. Amen. This month's learning of the community has been dedicated graciously by the Kohen family, by Dayan family, by Shei family. Should be an ultimate zchut for all their mishpachot Be'ezrat Hashem. Amen. So we mentioned that this Daf Chaf Zayin in Masechet Succah is very heavily focused on the Shitot and the stories of Rabbi Eliezer Agadol, Rabbi Eliezer ben Horkanus, the Rebbe of one of the main Rebbes of Rabbi Akiva, and we spoke about few of his halachic shitas, and we're continuing on that theme. Tanya, Rabbi Eliezer Omer. We learned in a Braita that Rabbi Eliezer used to say, "Keshem she'en adam yotze yedei chovato b'yom tov harishon shel chag belulavo shel chavero." Just like a person cannot be fulfilling his obligation of arba minim by holding a set of lulav etrog that doesn't belong to him. You can't just go say borrow a set of lulav etrog from someone else, because the pasuk says it must belong to you. Dichtiv, as the pasuk says, ulkachtem lachem beyom harishon, that the first day it has to be your set of arba minim. Now the second day already midraba, you could borrow perhaps, but the first day of the main obligation of arba minim, it has to be lachem. It has to be mishel lachem. When the pasuk says lachem, it should be yours. Why do you have to say ulkachtem lachem? Just say ulkachtem b'yom harishon. Why do you have to say ulkachtem lachem? I'm taking for myself. Well, you thought I'm going to take for my mother-in-law. Of course I'm going to be taking for myself. So why does the pasuk have to say ulkachtem lachem? To tell you that it should be mishel lachem. It has to belong to you. You can't just take somebody else's arba minim. And hence we have this whole concept. You see people on Chag HaSukkot, there are different levels of OCD in Klal Yisrael, and because when it comes to etrog, it's a once a year mitzvah, it's a precious mitzvah, and it's something that the pasuk says it has to be pri etz hadar, it has to be a glorious, beautiful, nice. So there are different levels. Some people are concerned maybe what they got is murkav, maybe it's not murkav. So there different levels. They get people who buy more than one type of etrog, and there are those who can't afford it, so they go to the rabbi or to the fellows in the Bet Knesset who get, okay, this one has Temani, the other one has Moroccan, the other one has a Chazonish, and you see them after Hallel going over to people to borrowing their set for a moment. What they're doing is not actually borrowing, they are getting it matana al menat lahazir. That means it is a full-fledged gift, but it is al menat lahazir, is stipulated in the gift that you must return it. Now that has a halachic value, because the moments that I have it is fully mine, 100%. But if I never give it back, then with the stipulation that I made, it turns out retroactively that it was never mine. But so long as I give it back to him, the meantime that I had it was fully mine to be able to accomplish anything that needs halachically my domain. So that's what happens with people. But really it's learned from this pasuk, ulkachtem lachem b'yom harishon, that it has to be your lulav hanetrog. It can't just be anyone else's that I'm borrowing. So says the Gemara, it has to be mishel lachem. Kach ein adam yotze yedei chovato besukato shel chavero. The same is, Rabbi Eliezer holds, that you cannot be yotze your yedei chova of sukkah with a sukkah that doesn't belong to you. Just like the arba minim has to be yours, the sukkah that you fulfill your obligation has to be your sukkah, has to belong to you. Why? Because it says Chag HaSukkot, dichtiv Chag HaSukkot ta'aseh lecha shivat yamim. You should make, this is again the pasuk that speaks about building the sukkah, right? We brought this for many different applications of halacha. Chag HaSukkot ta'aseh, you build lecha. It has to be yours. Says Rabbi Eliezer, just like it says lachem, ukachtem lachem, it should be yours. Ta'aseh lecha, it should be your sukkah. So therefore, if you go to somebody else's sukkah in Chag HaSukkot, you're not fulfilling your obligation. But Chachamim say, Af al pi she'amru en adam yotzei dechovato b'yom tov harishon belulavo shel chavero. Even though that Chazal tell us that when it comes to lulav and etrog, you have to have your own arba minim, your own set of lulav and etrog. Aval yotzei yedeh chovato besukato shel chavero. But you can use somebody else's sukkah. You could be invited. Again, imagine according to Rabbi Eliezer, can't get invited. Can't invite anybody. Everyone has to have their own sukkah and Chag HaSukkot. Let me say, no, you could. When it comes to Chag HaSukkot, the sukkah you can. Lulav and etrog you can't. Why is it that's different? After all, Rabbi Eliezer is saying good. Say lecha, lachem, it's the same thing. It's yours. It has to be yours. So says the Gemara, אבל יוצא אדם לחובתו בסוכתו של חברו. You could be יוצא with someone else's סוכה. תכתיב, as the pasuk says, כל האזרח בישראל ישבו בסוכות. All of the Jewish nation, כל האזרח, all of the Jewish residents, ישבו בסוכות. They will sit in the sukkah. Now you remember, this is one of the three main psukim that we have about Chag HaSukkot. And you remember how we had two of them that it says Besukot, but it's really written Besukat without the Vav. So this is one of those. If you take a look at the side of your Gemara where he actually brings the full Pasuk, even though that in the Gemara it's written with a Vav, with two Vavs, Besukot, Samech Vav, Chaf Vav Taf, the actual Pasuk on the side in Vayikra Perek Chaf Gimel is Basukot Yeshevu Shivat Yamim. Kol ha'ezrach b'Yisrael yeshevu basukot. Both of the sukkot that are mentioned in that pasuk are chaser. It's sukat. It's written b'sukat, which means it's singular form, which means one sukkah. All of the Jewish people could be reuim. They could be befitting to be sitting in one sukkah. Now, one sukkah cannot belong to all of Klal Yisrael. If you divide it, it's not going to even have shaveh pruta for each one of them. But yet, the pasuk is saying that all of them could sit as a... Now, you can't fit them all. So this one uses it, the other one uses it. Every person could be using that one sukkah. What does that tell you? Does it have to be my sukkah? No. You could have a sukkah that everyone is using it. It's like a communal sukkah, and that will be fine. So Chachamim say, from this very pasuk you see, that when it comes to sukkah, it doesn't have to belong to me. As long as it's a kosher sukkah that checks all the halachic boxes, I could be invited to someone else's sukkah. I could sit in a sukkah that doesn't belong to anybody. It's like a communal sukkah. No problem. Why? It's one sukkah that the entire Klal Yisrael could be using. Melamed teaches you, Shekol Yisrael Reuim Leshev Besukkah Achat. That all the Jews are fit to be sitting in the same sukkah. By the way, in a hashkafic parenthesis here, hashkafically, this is a very powerful message which is aligned with the message of Sukkah. Chag HaSukkah is be'osvecha migornecha, when you gather everything, right? And gathering the tevuah, Klal Yisrael al card, Reshit tevuato. Just like Chag HaSukkot is Chag HaAsif, when you gather the crops to your house, the crops of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Klal Yisrael. Kodesh Yisrael Hashem, the Jewish nation is holy to Hashem. Reshit tevuato. It's the beginning of His crops, his produce. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu gathers us to his house. Like the Sukkah is the place of Shekhinah. By the way, this is according to Rabbi Eliezer. We're speaking about Rabbi Eliezer over here, that in Daf Yud Aleph we had that Sukkot is Keneged Ananei HaKavod. We are commemorating the clouds of glory. HaKadosh Baruch Hu gathered us under the clouds of glory. So that's really a time for all of Klal Yisrael. It's a unifier. It's an equalizer that everyone, you can't see who is rich, who is not. Everyone is outside in the hut, in the sukkah, and that gathers and brings together the entire nation of Klal Yisrael. So to have this more than just a drasha, that all of the Jewish people are fit to sit in one sukkah, figuratively, certainly that is what's happening. All of us coming together in Chag HaSukkot is one very strong element of the entire theme of Chag HaSukkot, but this is the halachic ramification. The Chachamim's shita is that because it says Besukkah, you see that you don't have to have separation, that I have to have my own sukkah, you have to have your own sukkah, everyone can be sitting in the same sukkah. So says the Gemara, so after all, Rabbi Eliezer is saying good. He said, Lachem, we darshin, ulkachtem lachem means the etrog and lulav should belong to you. So here also says lecha. Rabbi Eliezer is having a very proper diuk. How do Chachamim deal with the drasha of ta'aseh lecha shivat yamim? So it says, Gemara mibaile lema'uti gezula. They need that for a sukkah gezula. If you go steal a sukkah from someone, now and you erect the sukkah, and now you're sitting in the sukkah, Hazak u'baruch, right? I'm not doing anything with the sukkah. It's a shade. So is that considered kasher or now? There's a general sugya of mitzvah haba ba'avera. When a person does a mitzvah that comes through an avera, are you fulfilling the mitzvah? Are you not fulfilling the mitzvah? Do you have to do it again? Not. Can you say bracha? Yes, no. It's a massive sugya on its own. But here we have an additional drasha here, according to Chachamim, that it has to be yours, meaning it can't be stolen. Not that it has to belong to you, but it can't be that you are using something stolen without the permission of the Baalim. Now, this gets into a question of whether or not a karka, it's not the sukkah is mine, but I'm building it on someone else's ground. So is that something that I could do? Well, hashtag building a sukkah in my driveway or in the walkway where the pedestrians have to pass, the sidewalk of the street is blocked by my sukkah. Is that mutar? Is that not mutar? I mean, not mutar. Forget about mutar. And forget about Chilul Hashem. But ama yotze, maybe stolen land is a problem. Maybe land is not stolen, so there's not a problem. It gets into a fascinating discussion, which is very much relevant to a day-to-day life. You have this whole thing of building a sukkah when the place does not belong to you. In New York City, for instance, this fellow had built a sukkah on the emergency fire staircase that's outside. He was on the top floor, and there's no building on the roof there. So he built a small sukkah in the emergency exit of the outdoor things that the buildings have in New York. And he said until they complain and the judge says anything, it's going to be already a week. Hazaku Baruch. So he didn't know that his next door neighbor actually had very heavy pull in the court system. So the day he builds it, the next day, or at the end of Sukkot, he gets a hazmana, he has a court case, he goes after, he goes there and he says, Ribono Shel Olam, I have to take it down now, right? So he goes in, and to his pleasant shock and surprise, the judge is a frum Jew. So So he says, he chastises him, says, how can you do this? This is so negligent and it's not responsible. You're blocking the thing. What if there's a fire? He says, this is absolutely unacceptable. You have 10 days to take this down. Real case, yeah. But that's obviously assuming that that's not stolen goods in this sugya, which B'ezrat Hashem at some point we'll have a reidbah to discuss the halachic ramifications of this. But nevertheless, Chachamim say Lecha is coming to tell you can't steal. If you have a sukkah that's stolen, then you cannot be yotze with that. Your obligation of sukkah, and it's not just yours. Even if somebody else stole the sukkah, still is not considered something that a person should necessarily be using, which is again something we're going to be discussing in Daf Chavtet by the sugya of avunkiri, which is upcoming. So says the Gemara, Aval she'ula, but if you borrow, even though that's not yours, you're borrowing it. Ktiv kol ha'ezrach b'Yisrael yeshu b'sukkot. You could use somebody else's sukkah, even though that it doesn't belong to you. So that's how Chachamim answer Rabbi Eliezer when he says Lecha. They say, yeah, Lecha is coming to exclude Gezula. Rabbi Eliezer, Hai kol ha'ezrach b'Yisrael yeshu b'sukkot, my avidle. So now we go to Rabbi Eliezer. So how do you answer Chachamim's raya? The proof of Chachamim is pretty strong also. Kol ha'ezrach b'Yisrael yeshu b'sukkot. It says b'sukkat to indicate that all of them are sitting in the same sukkah. Is coming to add something. Kol ha'ezrach b'Yisrael. Why do you have to say that? Says the Gemara. No, how mibayle leger shenitgayer bentayim vekatan shenitgadel bentayim. Now, remember, yesterday we discussed the very first shita of Rabbi Eliezer was that you need a sukkah to be for 7 full days. You can't build a sukkah in the middle of Chag. You can't just initiate building a sukkah in Chol HaMoed and sit in it, because a sukkah has to be used for 7 full days. Right? Remember that the whole chiddush was, if the wind blew off my sukkah, it collapsed, and now I am rebuilding the same sukkah, we needed to say that according to Rabbi Eliezer, that's fine, because it's really the same sukkah. But anything short of that, you can't build a sukkah in the middle of Chol HaMoed. You can't change sukkah from one sukkah to another. So what happens when you have a boy that becomes bar mitzvah in the middle of Chag HaSukkot and Chol HaMoed? Or he's going to build a sukkah, but yesterday he didn't have a sukkah. So it's a half a Chag, or a ger that he finishes, he completes his process of gerut on Chol HaMoed, right? And now he wants to build a sukkah. And he goes to Rabbi Eliezer and says, what do you do now? So says Rabbi Eliezer, that case, because this person was not a bar chiyuva up until now, it's not a negative. It's not that he was obligated and he used a different sukkah, or he didn't use any sukkah. This is the beginning of his obligation. That's what it says, Kol ha'ezrach b'Yisrael yeshu b'sukkot, that is coming to add that even though that these fellows, the ger and the katan that became bar mitzvah, did not have the first half of sukkah in this sukkah, this ends up being a sukkah only for half of the chag, still it is fine. So that's the exception to the rule, says Rabbi Eliezer. V'Rabbanan, kevan she'amru osin sukkah becholo shel moed. Rabbanan don't have to darshan that, because they hold that the sukkah could be for 1 day, could be for half a chag, no problem. They don't subscribe to this shita of Rabbi Eliezer that you need a sukkah for all of the chag. You remember, they both darshan the same pasuk. Rabbi Eliezer says, Chag HaSukkot ta'aseh shiv'at yamim. There has to be a sukkah for 7 full days. And Chachamim say, Chag HaSukkot ta'aseh shiv'at yamim. All the 7 days you could build a sukkah. Any of the days of the Chag you could build a sukkah, no problem. They read the same pasuk differently, but once Chachamim don't subscribe that the sukkah has to be there for 7 days. Of course, a katan that becomes bar mitzvah, or a ger tzedek that finishes his gerut process, could build a sukkah that day, and there's no problem whatsoever. So says the Gemara, Tanu Rabbanan, we learned, Maaseh Rabbi Eliezer shalach la'akpir penei Rabbi Eliezer Rabo. Sorry, this is מעשה ברבי אילאי שהלך להקפיר בין רבי אליעזר לרבו בלוד ברגל. Story with Rabbi Eliezer. One of the students of Rabbi Eliezer was Rabbi Eli, and he traveled from his city to the city of Lod, which is where Rabbi Eliezer ben Horkanus lived, on Chol HaMoed of Chag HaSukkot, to go see him. So Amar Lo, now your Talmud is coming from a different city. What's the Shalom Aleichem? What's the greeting? He says, Eli, he says to his students, Eli, encha mishoftei haregel? He says, you stopped keeping Shabbat and Yom Tov? You're no longer Shomer Shabbat, not keeping the Chag anymore. Why? Why would he greet him like this? Because of a different shita of Rabbi Eliezer. This is again a whole daf dedicated to all of the halachic views of Rabbi Eliezer. So he told him, oh, you're not keeping Moed anymore. Shaya Rabbi Eliezer Omer, because one of the distinct shitot of Rabbi Eliezer was Meshabeach ani et ha'atzlanin. Rabbi Eliezer used to say, I love the lazy people when it comes to Chag, right? The only positive thing about being lazy, the only silver lining, so to speak, is she'en yotzin mibatein baregel, because they don't leave their house on Yom Tov. They're lazy. They don't leave their house on Yom Tov, and they end up spending the time with the family. Dichtiv, as the pasuk says, ve'samachta, you should be happy, but you know how you should be happy? Ata, you ubetecha, you, your wife, your entire family should be happy together. Hashtag Uman. Scratch that, right? So the Gemara says, wait a second, right? Is that true? I have a story from Rabbi Eliezer himself. This is what happened with Rabbi Eliezer. V'amar Rabbi Yitzchak, minayin shechayav adam la'akbil penei rabo baregel. We learned, now it could be prior to this story that we're going to discuss, Rabbi Yitzchak says, and this is accepted by everyone, every individual, every Talmid must go to visit and pay due respect to his Rebbe on Chag Beregel. So all Rabbi Eli is doing what Rabbi Yitzchak says a person is obligated to do. Shenemar, and we learned this from Madua, this is Isha Shunamit, right? Isha Shunamit, when her miracle child died, and she didn't want to say it to her husband, so she puts the kid on Aliyah on the second floor on the bed as though he's sleeping, and she just rushes out to go to Elisha Hanavi. And the husband is working on the field, sees the wife is getting on a horse to go and he says, where are you going? He says, I'm going to the Navi. And what does he say? He said, well, why are you going today? Today is not a Chag. And you learn from that on Chag a person goes to see the Rebbe. Now this is a very, very difficult proof because the pasuk doesn't necessarily talk about Chag. It says Lo Chodesh v'Lo Shabbat Hayom. Talks about Rosh Chodesh, talks about Shabbat. So it says the Farshim are busy explaining Shabbat means the Chag, and so on. So it says the Gemara. Shenemar Maduat Holechet Elav. The husband turns to the wife, says, why are you going to Elisha Navi today? Lo Chodesh v'Lo Shabbat. Today is not Rosh Chodesh, is not Shabbat. Miklal de Chodesh v'Shabbat michayev inish la'akpul lepnei aper rabeh. From here you see that on Shabbat and Chodesh a person is obligated to go visit their Rebbe. So says the Gemara, this is a member of Rabbi Yitzchak. Everyone agrees with it. So Rabbi Eli, all he was doing this. You have to leave your house to go to your Rebbe. You can't say you can't leave your house. You have to spend the time with your family because you're obligated to go to your. So says the Gemara, no, the difference is lo kasha. It's not a contradiction because had the azil ve'ati biyomeh, had the azil ve'lo ati biyomeh. When you're close by, that you could go the same day and come back the same day. You spend a few hours with your Rebbe and you come back. You're not taking away that much from the family, from the Chag. That is where you're obligated to go. But if you have to leave town Like here, the case of Rabbi Eli that left town to go to Lod, the city of Rabbi Eliezer ben Horkanus, that already is not a positive thing. Now this, by the way, prompts a massive question, because probably the most famous story about Rabbi Eliezer ben Horkanus that everybody knows, every little kid knows, is the story that is codified in Haggadah Shel Pesach. Maaseh Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yoshua, Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Tarfa, Shayu Mesuvim, Bebnei Barak. This is Leil Pesach. So that's for sure Regel. And Rabbi Eliezer, who lives in Lod, has gone out, leaving his family to stay with his student, Rabbi Akiva. That's the only one that lived in Bnei Barak. So that, of course, prompts an obvious question. When did Rabbi Eliezer became not Shomer Yom Tov, right? As he said to Rabbi Eli, right? You say you're not a Shomer Yom Tov. So it says the Mefarashim, there are different ways to answer it, but one of the powerful ways to answer it is that these are people who saw the Churban HaBayit. These are people who saw people in masses being slaughtered and the destruction of Beit HaMikdash. This was a depressing time in Klal Yisrael, very difficult times. And to immediately afterwards to sit by a Pesach Seder, feel like Bnei Chorin, it's a very difficult thing. The only person that always had found the silver lining in everything was Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva is the person that sees foxes coming out of the place of Kodesh Kodashim. Everyone is tearing their clothing and they're crying, and he's laughing. So, you see, the pasuk says Shalim Hilchubo. It means that the pasukim of Tanakh are going to be so vividly coming through. And now I know that the pasukim in Zechariah that says again Yerushalayim is going to be rebuilt, and Zekenim and Zkenot and old people and young people and Talmudei Torah and Yeshivot are going to be flourishing and rebuilding. That's also true. So that's why I'm so happy. Who thinks like that? Only Rabbi Akiva. And you could go through all the things, the incident that he had, that everyone kicked him out of their houses, and he had to stay alone outside, and his donkey was torn apart, and his rooster was taken, and his light was there, and he says, Kol ma David Rachmana letavavid, right? And then his life was saved because of that. Turns out to be there are about 9 or 10 different stories in the Gemara and in the Midrashim about Rabbi Akiva, and his sense of positivity, absolute positivity, and therefore they needed to be around him to feel the amazing aura and the energy of the Chag of Sukkot. But nevertheless, that's the Shita of Rabbi Eliezer, Tanu Rabbanan. Another story. Now, the story by Rabbi Eliezer that we promised we're going to discuss, that seems like he went out of his house himself, right? So what happened exactly? Maaseh Rabbi Eliezer shavat b'Galil ha'Elyon. He was in Galil ha'Elyon, and he was sitting besukato shel Yochanan Rabbi Eli. He was sitting in the sukkah of Yochanan Rabbi Eli. And this was in Kesari or in Kesarion. Vehikia Chama leSukkah. So it was getting hot as the day is unraveled and the sun is coming to hit the sukkah, and it's getting hot. So Amar lo, Rabbi Yochanan asked Rabbi Eliezer, he said, Ma'u she'efros aleha sadin. Can I take a sadin, a cloth, a mapa, and spread it on the ceiling of the sukkah, this way deflecting the light of the sun and making more cool, nice shade inside the sukkah? What's the question? The question is not a sukkah question. The question is a Shabbat Yom Tov question, because you are adding to an ohel arai. You're adding to an ohel arai. Is that mutar or is that asur? I'm adding to a binyan. Adding to an ohel is the same thing as adding to a binyan. Can I add to the building on Shabbat and Yom Tov? Is that mutar? Is that asur? And Rabbi Eliezer, instead of answering the question, he completely deflected the question. He dodged the question completely. Instead of answering him, he tells him some interesting piece of information. He says, Amar lo, do you know, interesting yidiyah, En lecha kol shevet v'shevet miYisrael shelo ha'emid mimenu shofet. There's no shevet in Klal Yisrael that did not have a leading individual coming from them that saved Am Yisrael and led Am Yisrael in the Galut. Again, Rashi goes through some of these examples from the time of Yehoshua until the time of Shaul. All of the leaders of Klal Yisrael were called Shoftim. So Eliah Kohen, was the Kohen Gadol, he was also a Shofet. So that's from Shevet Levi, right? And Ehud and Otniel and all those other ones Rashi brings. So every Shevet had a Shofet coming from them. Nothing to do with the question. He completely dodged the question, didn't answer it. So fine, so he got the point. But they're still there for another few hours, and now the sun is coming more up, and it's becoming hotter and hotter. So he asked the question again. The sun got to the half of the sukkah already, the rays of sun. Amalo, he asks again, Chacham, tell me if it's mutar to put the sadin, not mutar to put the sadin. Amalo, he says, by the way, did you know, there's not a shevet in Klal Yisrael, that they didn't have a navi for Klal Yisrael. Shevet Yehuda Binyamin, and Shevet Yehuda Binyamin, even though that they didn't have an official navi from them coming, but He'emidu Melachim, at least they had kings al-pi neviim, based on the inauguration, the nomination of a king would be through a navi, right? Shmuel HaNavi was the one that anointed Shaul and David. Now, David was from Shevet Yehuda. Shaul was from Shevet Binyamin. So Yehuda and Binyamin, even though that they didn't have official Nevi'im, but they had Melachim that they were anointed and appointed based on Nevi'im. Basically, he dodged the question again. Right? I just told him some interesting piece of information. Higia Chama lemeraglotav shel Rabbi Eliezer. Now it was Ba'u Hamayim ad Nafesh. It was too hot. The sun got to be on the body almost. And instead of asking a question, this time Rabbi Yochanan Rabbi Eli just took the sadin and went and put it on top of the sukkah, right? Natal Yochanan sadin upires alea. He spread it on the sukkah. Now, this obviously was very questionable because he didn't get an answer, right? So how can you doing this? Maybe it's Asur on Shabbat to do that, So either you have to say that he held it's completely mutar, but for the kavod of Rabbi Eliezer, wanted to ask him, also get his check. It's the kavod of the guest rabbi, or that he knew for sure that when it's sar, when the sun is coming to come on you, that's mutar. But I wanted to know if you could do it earlier on when the tzorech is not really there. But now, the reaction of Rabbi Eliezer is fantastic. Rabbi Eliezer just gets up and leaves, right? He fshil Rabbi Eliezer talito la'achorav, he puts his thing on, and he leaves. V'yatza. Lo mipnei shehifligu b'devarim. Not because they had a machloket. Not because, and also when he didn't answer him, not because he wants to push him away with words, that he said this whole thing of Nevi'im and Shoftim from all the Shvatim. He's not trying to drag a cup and make fun of him. One of the midot of Rabbi Eliezer was, at least in the living time of his Rebbe. After his Rebbe passed away, it's a different story. But he never, ever said a thing that he didn't directly hear from his Rebbe. So he didn't have a Mesorah on this. He didn't have a Mesorah on this. Rabbi Eliezer, remember, is the one that the Mishnah in Pirkei Avot says he was Borsut Sheino Ma'abed Tipa. He was the ultimate photographic memory, that he never forgot a thing in his life. He was like a recording machine. And he said, I never say anything that I didn't hear from my Rebbe. So therefore, I am telling, now this obviously has to be answered, because if you take a look at the beginning of Rabbi Eliezer was a Baal Tshuva at the age 28, and when the whole story unravels in the first parak of Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer, saying his history, you do see that he said a lot of things that seemingly are categorized as new things. That's something to deal with, that we're going to B'ezras Hashem come back to in the next year. The next year is going to be fantastic Amud of all Agadic stories about Rabbi Eliezer, which is going to be very, very kedai. It's a lighter Amud, tremendously informative B'ezras Hashem for the days to come.